Welcome to Story Times with Murph. I am your aforementioned Murph and writer of an incomplete epic poem about a bugbear named Bugbear. We'll continue our reading of The Repair of Reputations from Robert W. Chambers from his collection, The King in Yellow. I must note that there is a mention of suicide and some less savory tropes of racism and anti-Semitism baked in within the story, but as I do, you can read them as ironic rather than stalwart stances on being an asshole. But let's continue. But before that, as I think about it, please get your coffee here, put us in your weekly rotation, and also buy your books here. That would be great. Okay, getting back into it. I'd eaten nothing since breakfast, but I was not hungry. A wretched, half-starved creature who stood looking across the street at the lethal chamber noticed me and came to tell me a tale of misery. I gave him money, I don't know why, and he went away without thanking me. An hour later, another outcast approached and whined his story. I had a blank bit of paper in my pocket on which was traced the yellow sign, and I handed it to him. He looked at it stupidly for a moment, and then with an uncertain glance at me, folded it with what seemed to be exaggerated care and placed it in his bosom. The electric lights were sparkling among the trees, and the new moon shone in the sky above the lethal chamber. It was tiresome waiting in the square. I wondered what the marble arch to the artillery stables. I wandered from the marble arch to the artillery stables and back again to the lotus fountain. The flowers and grass exhaled a fragrance which troubled me. The jet of the fountain played in the moonlight, and the musical splash of falling drops reminded me of the tinkle of chained mail in Halbert's shop. But it was not so fascinating, and the dull sparkle of the moonlight on the water brought no such sensation of exquisite pleasure as when the sunshine played over the polished steel of a corset on Halbert's knee. I watched the bats darting and turning above the water plants in the fountain basin, but their rapid, jerky flight set my nerves on edge, and I went away to walk aimlessly to and fro among the trees. The artillery stables were dark, but in the cavalry barracks, the officers' windows were brilliantly lighted, and the sally port was constantly filled with troopers in fatigue, carrying straw and harness and baskets filled with tin dishes. Twice the mounted sentry at the gates was changed, while I wandered up and down the asphalt walk. I looked at my watch. It was nearly time. The lights in the barracks went out one by one, the barred gate was closed, and every minute or two an officer passed in through the side wicket, leaving a rattle of accoutrements and a jingle of spurs on the night air. The square had become very silent. The last homeless loiterers had been driven away by the gray-coated park policemen. The car tracks along Worcester Street were deserted, and the only sound which broke the stillness was the stamping of the sentry's horse and the ring of his saber against the saddle pommel. In the barracks, the officers' quarters were still lighted, and military servants passed and repassed before the bay windows. 12 o'clock sounded from the new spire of St. Francis Xavier, and at the last stroke of the sad-toned bell, a figure passed through the wicket beside the portcullis, returned the salute of the sentry, and crossing the street, entered the square and advanced towards the Benedict apartment house. "Lewis," I called. The man pivoted on his spurred heels and came straight to me. "Is that you, Hildred?" "Yes, you are on time." I took his offered hand, and we strolled toward the lethal chamber. He rattled on about his wedding and the graces of Constance and their future prospects, calling my attention to his captain's shoulder strap and the triple gold arabesque on his sleeve and fatigue cap. I believe I listened as much to the music of his spurs and saber as I did his boyish babble, And at last we stood under the elms on the 4th Street corner of the square opposite the lethal chamber. Then he laughed and asked me what I wanted with him. I motioned him to a seat on the bench under the electric light and sat down beside him. He looked at me curiously with the same searching glance which I hate and fear so in doctors. I felt the insult of his look, but he did not know it, and I carefully concealed my feelings. "Well, old chap," he inquired, "what can I do for you?" I drew from my pocket the manuscript and notes of the imperial dynasty of America, and looking him at the eye, said, "I will tell you. On your word as a soldier, promise me to read this manuscript from beginning to end without asking me a question. Promise me to read these notes in the same way, and promise me to listen to what I have to tell later." "I promise, if you wish it," he said pleasantly. "Give me those papers, Hildred." He began to read, raising his eyebrows with a puzzled, whimsical air, which made me tremble with suppressed anger. As he advanced, his eyes contracted and his lips seemed to form the word rubbish. Then he looked slightly bored, but apparently for my sake read, with an attempt at interest, which presently ceased to be an effort. He started when in the closely written pages he came to his own name, and when he came to mine, he lowered the paper and looked sharply at me for a moment. But he kept his word and resumed his reading, and I let the half-formed question die on his lips unanswered. When he came to the end and read the signature of Mr. Wilde, he folded the paper carefully and returned it to me. I handed him the notes, and he settled back, pushing his fatigue cap to his forehead with a boyish gesture, which I remembered so well in school. I watched his face as he read. When he finished, I took the notes with the manuscript and I placed them in my pocket. Then I unfolded a scroll marked with a yellow sign. He saw the sign, but he did not seem to recognize it. I called his attention to it somewhat sharply. "Well," he said, "I see it. What is it?" "It is the yellow sign," I said angrily. "Oh, that's it, is it?" said Lewis in a flattering voice, which Dr. Archer used to employ with me, and would probably have employed again had I not settled his affair from him. I kept my rage down and answered as steadily as possible. "Listen, you have engaged your word." "I am listening, old chap," he replied soothingly. I began to speak very calmly. "Dr. Archer, having some means, being possessed of the secret of imperial succession, attempted to deprive me of my right, alleging that, because of a fall from my horse 4 years ago, I had become mentally deficient. He presumed to place me under restraint in his own house in hopes of either driving me insane or poisoning me. I have not forgotten him. I visited him last night, and the interview was final." Lewis turned quite pale, but did not move. I resulted triumphantly. "There are yet 3 people to be interviewed in the interest of Mr. Wilde and myself. There are my cousin Lewis, Mr. Halberg, and his daughter Constance." Lewis sprang to his feet, and I rose also, and flung the paper marked with the yellow sign to the ground. "Oh, I don't need that to tell you what I have to say," I cried with a laugh of triumph. "You must renounce your crown to me. Do you hear? To me." Lewis looked at me with a startled air, but recovering himself, said kindly, "Of course I renounce what is it I must renounce?" "The crown," I said angrily. "Of course," he answered. I renounce it. Come on, old chap. I'll walk you back to your rooms with you. Don't try any of your doctor's tricks on me," I cried, trembling with fury. "Don't act as if you think I am insane." "What nonsense," he replied. "Come on, it's getting late, Hildred." "No," I shouted. "You must listen. You cannot marry. I forbid it. Do you hear? I forbid it. You shall renounce the crown, and in reward I grant you exile. But if you refuse it, you shall die." He tried to calm me, but I was roused at last, and drawing my long knife, barred his way. Then I told him they would find Dr. Archer in the cellar with his throat open, and I laughed at his face when I thought of Vance and his knife and the order signed by me. "Ah, you are the king," I cried, "but I shall be king. Who are you to keep me from empire over all the habitable earth? I was born the cousin of a king, but I shall be king." Lewis stood white and rigid before me. Suddenly a man came running up 4th Street, entered the gaze of the lethal timber, traversed the path to the bronze doors at full speed, and plunged into the death chamber with a cry of one demented. And I laughed and wept tears, for I had recognized Vance, and knew that Hallbrook and his daughter were no longer in my way. "Go," I cried to Lewis. "You have ceased to be a menace. You will never marry Constance now, and if you marry anyone else in your exile, I will visit you as I did my doctor last night. Mr. Wilde takes charge of you tomorrow." Then I turned and darted into South Fifth Avenue, and with a cry of terror, Lewis dropped his belt and saber and followed me like the wind. I heard him close behind me at the corner of Bleecker Street, and I dashed into the doorway under Halbert's sign. He cried, "Halt or I fire!" But when he saw that I flew up the stairs, leaving Halbert's shop below, he left me, and I heard him hammering and shouting at the door, as though it was possible to arouse the dead. Mr. Wilde's door was open, and I entered crying, "It is done! It is done! Let the nations rise and look upon their king." But I could not find Mr. Wilde, so I went to the cabinet and took the splendid diadem from its case. Then I drew on the white silk robe, embroidered with a yellow sign, and placed the crown upon my head. At last I was king, king by my own right and Hastur, king because I knew the mystery of the Hades, and my mind had sounded the depths of the lake of Hali. I was king. The first gray pencilings of dawn would raise a tempest which would shake 2 hemispheres. Then, as I stood, my every nerve pitched to the highest tension, fate with the joy and splendor of thought, without in the dark passage a man groan. I seized the tallow dip and sprang to the door. The cat passed me like a demon, and the tallow dip went out. But my long knife flew swifter than she, and I heard the screech, and I knew my knife had found her. For a moment I listened to her tumbling and thumping about in the darkness, and then her frenzy ceased. I lighted a lamp and raised it over my head. Mr. Wilde lay on the floor with his throat torn open. At first I thought he was dead, but as I looked, a green sparkle came into his sunken eyes. His mutilated hand trembled, and then a spasm stretched his mouth from ear to ear. For a moment my terror and despair gave place to hope, but as I bent over to him, his eyeballs rolled clean around in his head, and he died. Then while I, transfixed with rage and despair, seeing my crown, my empire, every hope and every ambition, my very life, lying prostrate there with the dead master, they came and seized me from behind and bound me until my veins stood out like cords and my voice failed with paroxysms of frenzied screams. But I still raged, bleeding and infuriated among them, and more than one policeman felt my sharp teeth. Then, when I could no longer move, they came nearer. I saw old Halberg, and behind him my cousin Lewis's ghastly face, and further in a corner a woman, Constance, weeping softly. "Ah, I see it now," I shrieked. "You have seized the throne and empire. Woe, woe to you who are crowned the king in yellow." Editor's note: Mr. Cascani died yesterday in the asylum for the criminally insane. And that's the end of the Repair of Reputations. This continues to go further, and you get little snippets of the King in Yellow. We'll see if we'll pick back up on more stories from the King in Yellow or do something else. I will keep it open. Okay. Thank you. See you for the next series, whatever it may be. And as always, be cool and bye.